wanted to come in and talk about something that is quite important. Now, if you're finding that your child is stuck at the same grade, for instance, they're stuck at grade 3, struggling to hit that 4 or 5, or stuck at grade 6 to get from grade 6 to grade 7, or maybe it seems like they're doing well, but then when they come to exams, they tend to trip up. Exams tend to trip them up, or probably they're struggling with certain specific topics, then they might have an issue with foundations, okay? And that is exactly what we are going to talk about today. So today's title is, if I can just quickly share that with you. So our title for today is Foundation Matters, Why Mastering Basic Concepts Elevates Academic Success. So what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at why is it important to master foundations? What are the mistakes students are making when it comes to those foundational concepts? And also, how can students focus on foundational concepts to improve their grades? So now, we have a tool that we give our students to help them to not only identify their foundations, but to also focus on their foundations so that can help them. So if you watch this training to the end, I am going to give you access to, or I'm going to give you the opportunity so that you can get access to actually get that tool. Now, just to give you an example then of, some of our students who have followed the process of foundations. So foundations is one of our pillars, right, that we really focus on here. So here's an example of a student, Ogosa, who was at those grades for the maths and science around those grades 5, struggling to achieve grade 7. But when we worked on those foundations with her, she actually exceeded, she ended up achieving grade 8 in her sciences. So that is the power of really knowing the foundations, really knowing the basics. So that's why we're going to talk about this today. So to start off with, we're going to start by talking about the importance of foundations. Why is foundations important? And a good something to think about here is a skyscraper, right? So I want you to just have in mind about what a skyscraper looks like. So if you think of a skyscraper, each subject is basically that skyscraper, right? So the students, their maths, their biology, the chemistry is the skyscraper. Now, each floor, let me just share this with you so that you can see it. So each floor in that skyscraper is going to be the students' basic concepts and skills. So let's just imagine that each floor is the students' basic concepts and skills. Now, if they had a weak foundation, so we say each floor represents the basic concepts and skills that the students must learn before they move on to the next. So if the students have a weak foundation, what do you think will happen to that skyscraper? What do you think will happen to that skyscraper? Of course, it's going to crumble, right? The entire structure is just going to become unstable. Now, this is what is happening to our students, right? They have this weak foundation, and so they have this difficulty now in understanding more complex concepts. So the higher up a student goes in secondary school, the more unstable that skyscraper becomes, because the foundation is not strong enough to withstand more. Okay, so when you're watching this back, drop a 1 in the chat if that makes sense to you. If you completely resonate with that, drop a 1 in the chat for me. So here are some examples. If they don't know their times table, then they're going to struggle with basics of fractions and decimals, right? Or in science, if they don't know, in chemistry, if they don't know basic atomic structure, for me, this is one of those things that I always like, no matter how high that student is, I like to double check that they have that good grounding. If they don't have that good grounding in basic atomic structure, it's going to affect their chemistry when they go deeper into chemical reactions, and it's also going to affect their physics as well. So hopefully that now really makes sense in terms of why it is important to have a solid, foundation. We want to now look at what are some of the mistakes that students are making when it comes to foundational concepts. So when you're watching this, either now or you're watching this in the replay, I want you to just put a comment down below. What are some of the mistakes and the misconceptions that you think students are making, or your child in particular is making So the first one is they think foundational concept can be skipped if they don't understand it immediately. And now there's a bit of a yes and no in that, and I'll talk about that. But one of the things I talked about in my very short video yesterday is I talked about the fact that I love cooking, right? I love working with students. I love seeing students reach their potential, but I also love cooking. And for me to get to the stage where I'm a relatively confident cook, I had to understand about the foundations of cooking, right? So how much onions do you need? How much oil do you need? When do you boil the meat? How long do you leave it for? What are you looking for, right? These are all the foundations of cooking. And if I didn't get to grips with that, then that's going to make it harder for me it's going to make it harder for me to be able to be a confident cook. Now, this is the same with students. If they don't get to grips with the basics, it's going to be harder for them to get a stronger, a more solid understanding of the subjects, and particularly be able to deal with more complex topics, plus also understand when they're looking at questions, no matter how the questions are flipped, they understand it because they have that fantastic grounding of the basics. And the pandemic was a really good example that showed the importance of basics. When I was teaching students during the pandemic, many of them had dropped 2-3 grades, some 4 grades. And as I was teaching them, I was realized they just didn't have the basics. So that lack of basics can really pull you back. So it's very, very key that the students actually know the basics. Okay. The other mistakes that students can make is that foundational concepts are below them. They think foundational concepts are below them. And with this one, you typically get it, or you tend to get it more with higher students. They think, I'm good, I am quite advanced, or I'm in a higher class. I do know the foundations, or I don't need to know the foundations. But I'll give you an example of a student that I spoke to recently, Mary. And Mary wants to go and become a doctor. And she's hovering around the grade 6. And what she mentioned to me was that when she was doing well at school, she was quite at the top, Key Stage 3, Year 9. And even Year 10, she just kind of took a bit off the brakes because she thought she was fine, right? She didn't really need to focus on those foundations. And so what's happened now is Mary is now stuck at a grade 6, and she's not able to bring herself up to like a higher grade so that she can be quite competitive, because medicine is quite a competitive field. Or I won't say she's not able to, but she's working harder to get herself up to that higher grade. Because she just thought, I'm good, I'm fine, I can sit back. All right. So yeah, this is quite common with foundation students. They just think, I'm fine, I'm good, don't need to worry about anything. And as we can see in the case with Mary, that really affected her, and now that means that she had to work a lot harder. Another mistake students can make is they say, well, advanced problems don't require basic knowledge, right? So again, it's linked to that, I'm in the top set, or I'm doing quite well, I don't need to know that basic knowledge. But sometimes students get to a grade 5, a grade 6, and maybe at a push even a grade 7, not because they have strong foundations, because they memorize. And I was one of those students at school until I kind of learned and changed things a bit. I was doing a lot of memorization, and that helped me to get to a high level. But memorization is not enough, right? In fact, memorization is not the best way to remember. You've got to get those foundations. So where students think I'm fine, that is not good enough. They actually need to make sure that they are really, really having those solid foundations. They're really actually building up their foundations. Okay. Now, third thing we're going to talk about is how students can focus on foundational concepts. So if we go back, we have looked at the importance of foundations, why foundations is important, what are the mistakes, and also how students can focus on foundational concepts. So that's going to be the third one. All right, if I just jump into that, firstly, they just need to be able to identify their foundations, right? So they need to identify what is it I don't know so that I can focus on that, right? Once they identify that, they will then be able to focus on their foundations. Now, we have a tool here that we use to help our students identify and focus on their foundations. If that's something you're interested in, if that's something you think will help your child, just put in the chat foundation identifier. That's foundation identifier. Now, once they've identified it, they need to focus on the foundations, right? They need to carve out time to identify those foundations. And the good news is this does not mean more time or more work, right? So if they are revising for, 30 minutes on a topic, they can spend that first 10 minutes just going over those foundations, just going back over their books or watching a YouTube video on the part that they are stuck on, right? So once they've identified it, they really need to go over it. And the good news is that it does not mean more time, because we know students are overwhelmed already. So we don't want to be adding any more time to their already busy schedule, their already busy workload. And finally, they need to relate new concepts to what they already learned, right? So, you know, because if you think of foundations, they just that block, right? But you don't want to know the one block. In order for everything to fit together, let's imagine you're building a house, all of those blocks need to come together. All of those blocks need to cement properly. And this is where the students who are at a lower level, this is where they fall. Or even the students who are, I would say, not at least not getting grade 7s and 9s, or not getting grade 8s to 9s, it's because they're not relating those new concepts to what they've already learned. So they can think about where a new topic links with what have already been covered in the curriculum. So when they're learning, they shouldn't be learning in isolation. Another good one that I love is mind maps. Mind maps really help you to go deep and think about what is the specific topic and how does that topic expand? How far does that topic go? What does that topic link with, right? So using mind maps as a learning tool and as a revision tool is really good to relate concepts, but also practicing with increasing difficulty as well. So they can start with something small and then add on something extra to it once they are comfortable. So earlier on, I showed you, oops. So earlier on, I showed you, the benefit of focusing on the foundations. One of our students, Ogosa here, who really made that massive jump. So here's another one of our students, Jessica, right, who was at a grade 3 in both maths and science. And by really honing in on those foundations, she improved by 2 grades. So really, really important. I think that's it for today. As I said, if you think, so we have a tool that we use to help our students identify foundations and focus on them. If you think that would be helpful for you, I just want you to type foundation identifier in the chat and we'll get that sent to you.